All right, guys, now on to our In the History Book section, where this week, in honor of women's college basketball starting next week, we take a look at the first intercollegiate women's basketball game ever played. So on April 4th, 1896, at San Francisco's Page Street Armory, history was made. 9 Stanford women took the court to play against 9 women from the University of California. In attendance was 700 women spectators who paid 50 cents and came out to watch this game. Men were banned from attending this game for modesty reasons, so some men decided to climb the roof of the building to watch through the windows. The game of basketball was still fairly new at the time. It was just 4 years earlier that James Naismith actually invented the sport, and so far the sport was primarily played by men. The game of basketball was so new that even the Cal men didn't even have a team. They didn't even play their first intercollegiate game until 1907. So the women for sure were ahead of their times. The rules that Naismith came up with were adapted by Sandra Beerson at Smith College to ensure that the game remained ladylike, and it banned things like stealing the ball and other rough play. Now, here were the rules. This was a 9-on-9 game. Yes, you heard me right. There were 18 players on the court at the same time. They played 2 20-minute halves. Each half of the court was zoned in thirds according to the so-called half-court rule that prevailed in the women's game until the 1960s. 3 players were consigned to each zone, and each player could possess the ball for 5 seconds at a time, and they could only dribble twice. Only the home players at the net could shoot, and they couldn't shoot with 2 hands. Very interesting rules, right? Now, let's talk about this game, and I specifically want to reference Mabel Craft's article in the Chronicle. So one thing to note is that men reporters also were not allowed to attend. So Mabel and other women journalists covered the game for San Francisco's top 3 newspapers. Mabel said that the crowd jammed the gallery at the Armory and roared until the glass doors in the gun cases shivered at the noise. Yeah, you heard that right. They were playing in a real armory with real guns in the building. There were many calls for time and some disputes. Enthusiastic captains claimed fouls, and some were allowed, sometimes with a slump and a slide. 3 girls would dive for the ball and end up in an inextricable heap of red, white, and blue. In less time than it takes to read it, they were all planted firmly on their 2 feet, flushed, perspiring intensely in earnest, and oblivious of everything except that ball. She wrote that basketball wasn't invented for girls, and there isn't anything effeminate about it. It was made for men to play indoors, and it is a game that would send the physician who thinks that feminine organization so delicate into hysterics as he tries so hard to perpetuate. The game itself was very low scoring, with the final score of Stanford 2, California 1. So keep in mind that at this time, backboards were not invented. And so if you ever heard of something called netball that they play in Australia, this is kind of similar to that. You literally have a hoop sitting on a pole with nothing else. So you basically had to have a perfect shot in order to actually score. Even with this low-scoring game, this was an historic game and, quote, the first great struggle in feminine athletics. And also, a thing to note is that this game was not just the first women's intercollegiate basketball game. This was the first women's intercollegiate game, period. So these ladies at Stanford and Cal, they made history on a lot of fronts. The hype for this game, while it was great at the time, it didn't last long. In December 1899, Stanford would shut down their women's team, and they said it was for the good of students' health and for the unpleasant publicity accompanied by the contest. However, the Stanford players did not, hang their heads. They decided to form an independent Palo Alto club, which kept competing. Cal's team, on the other hand, was a bit more well regarded. They would go on to continue to play basketball, and they would even be undefeated in their 1897 season. And they even got recognition in the school's yearbook, the 1900 Blue and Gold yearbook, which was a big deal at the time. So that was the story, guys. That was your first intercollegiate women's basketball game ever in 1896. Did y'all know about this game at all? Did you enjoy hearing about it? Looking at some of the writings of that game, it's kind of cool to read. And it also kind of hard to believe the way that they were playing basketball because it's so different than how we play basketball today. What are your thoughts about it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Does it surprise you that Stanford and Cal were the first teams to play against each other? Again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love this section, please let me know by giving this video a like. So NCAA updates for y'all. So college basketball officially starts next week. And before we get to the games, let's talk about the AP preseason's women's basketball All-American team.